Ladies and gentlemen, it's very good to see you back here in the Kellen Auditorium for the second half of our full-day symposium, Danish Design Review, New York 2012. And we've had a number of distinguished keynote speakers for our morning program. The idea has been to really set the scene, both with some historical perspectives and some more topical and polemic interventions about what is going on, what has been going on in Danish and indeed global design more recently. Now we are very excited to bring you into contact with a grand scale and special project that is ongoing at the moment at the UN headquarters here in New York. We have entitled our third keynote segment of the day, Living the Legacy, Danish Design at the UN. We will hear about this grand scale renovation of what's called the Trusteeship Council Chamber, originally designed in the early 50s by Danish architect and designer Finn Juhl, little known at that time and world famous since. In 2011, actually a bit earlier, in the late months of 2010, Denmark called a design competition, which was then won by the young designer duo Kasper Saldo and Thomas Seesgaard, to introduce new furniture into a renovated version or restored version of the old chamber. And the chamber is scheduled to be completed in the spring of 2013. And here with us today to present and discuss this exciting project, we have three distinguished speakers. We have Mary Burke, who is the principal of Burke Design and Architecture. She is also currently the chair of the Interior Architecture Committee at AIA. She's a professor, an associate professor at the Pratt Institute. We know that there are some Pratt students and faculty in this room today. And Mary also notably moderated the Danish Design Award ceremony, which took place at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York in 2011, where the winner was announced in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen of Denmark. And Mary also spoke about this project along with Anthony Cohen, our next guest speaker, at the NeoCon conference in Chicago in June of this year. And so Mary will be discussing and presenting this project along with Anthony Cohen, who's the principal and senior designer in the New York office of EYP Architects. And for the past 8 years, Anthony has been serving as the design and planning principal of the General Assembly and Conference buildings at the UN headquarters. That's quite a job, very impressive, and maybe a little daunting at times, which is, an integral part of the Capital Master Plan team working right now on restoring these amazing mid-century buildings. Mr. Cohen is also a member of AIA and a lead accredited architect. And as part of your presentation and conversation here today, we're going to bring up Mr. Carsten Stauer, the ambassador and permanent representative of Denmark to the UN, for a conversation about Denmark's role and motivation for entering into this grand-scale renovation project, and also the thinking behind the decision to combine brand-new design with some of the old classics in the Trusteeship Council Chamber. So please welcome our three speakers for this next 1 hour segment.
We're going to be working on a very different scale right now. And for those of you who may have been born after Ronald Reagan was reelected, and we're going to put this in context for you. We're going to talk about bricks and mortar. So pardon the fact I'm going to read from this so I don't get it wrong. The United Nations is an international organization whose stated aims are facilitating cooperation in international law, international security, economic development, social progress, human rights, and achievement of world peace. Founded in 1945 after World War II to replace the League of Nations, Its original intention was to stop wars between countries, and the United Nations complex has served as the UN official headquarters since its completion in 1952. There are 193 member states, including every internationally recognized sovereign state in the world but Vatican City. The UN was constructed in New York in 1949 to 1950, overlooking the East River, on 17 acres of land purchased from the foremost real estate developer of the time, William Zeckendorf, who would later employ a talented young architect by the name of I.M. Pei. Nelson Rockefeller arranged the purchase with an $8.5 million purchase funded by his father, John D. Rockefeller, who donated it to the city. And the lead architect for the building was Wallace K. Harrison, the personal architectural advisor for the Rockefeller family, who would later serve a similar critical role on the development of Lincoln Center. The UN decided to commission a collaborative effort among a multinational team of leading architects, including Harrison as chief architect and director of planning, and a board of design consultants nominated by member governments, among them Le Corbusier of France, Oscar Niemeyer of Brazil, who, by the way, is still alive and working at the age of 105, and Sven Markelius of Sweden. The site has extraterritoriality status, which means that it's another country, though it uses the US dollar as its currency and calls the New York City Fire Department when circumstances warrant. In 2007, UN officials announced that the complex would undergo a $1 billion renovation, expected to take about 7 years to complete. Right? Well,
2 billion.
Thank you, Wikipedia. A Swedish firm, check. Oops. Swedish firm Skanska won the bid to overhaul the buildings, which include the conference building, General Assembly, and Secretariat buildings. And officials hope the renovated buildings will achieve a LEED Silver status. The organization has 6 principal organs: the General Assembly, the Secretariat, the International Court of Justice, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and the United Nations Trusteeship Council, which suspended operations under its original mandate in 1994 with the independence of Palau, the last remaining UN trusteeship territory. Yes, Micronesia. Capital? Ngaralmud. And the heritage of the trusteeship council is the space that brings us here today, just as the United Nations embodied the best intentions of a world emerging from a second devastating war in less than 50 years. The trusteeship council represented and supported the aspirations of nations on the verge of independence. To a kid from Edina, Minnesota, that meant watching with great admiration as nations convene with thoughts of world neighbors and the rightness of conversational Esperanto. Extra points to anybody who knows what Esperanto was. We don't speak it. In any case, Denmark sponsored those aspirations in the Trusteeship Council, which is what we're going to look at now.
Thanks, Mary. One of the things that's important, and looking at the first slide, you really see it, is that the UN was unique, and in many ways it was first. The UN headquarters, if you look at this photo, most of the black and white photos are photos Ezra Stoller took in 1952. And what you see here is New York City from Queens, Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, in 1952. And you've got the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building. And there are no modern buildings. The Lever House went up about the same time, almost the same moment, and was simultaneous with the Secretariat building as the first modern buildings in New York. So part of it has to do with the UN as a departure from traditional architecture, and a very deliberate departure. There are other things about the UN that are also unique, the UN headquarters. And one is that it was the first purpose-built building with simultaneous interpretation. From the very start, even though simultaneous interpretation was developed in the 20s, from the very start, the UN headquarters was set up for interpreters in interpretation booths, interpreting, not translating, that's what's done on paper, interpreting the speeches as they were spoken. Prior to that electronic development, interpreters did consecutive interpretation, going as long as 15 or 20 minutes, listening and then repeating what they had in fact heard. So this allowed for a much faster translation of speech, and so that the UN was always sort of technologically advanced. All meetings were always recorded. That was part of the organization's DNA and part of the sense of architectural and institutional transparency that was so important. One of the other things, developments, amazing firsts of this complex is this group of men. They're all men. In 1947, these guys spent from early February until the end of June doing what was basically a constant charrette of the design of the campus. Markelius on the far left, Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer in the middle, Harrison, the smiling guy behind, and Matthew Nowicki from Poland on the far right. One of the things about this original group of architects is that they were all from member states at the founding of the UN. So you had no Germans, no Japanese, no Italians. In 1997, the organization decided that it was time for a major renovation, an overhaul of systems. Some of the air handlers were 60 years old, almost 60 years old at that point, and needed to be changed. They did a full-scale conditions assessment of the campus, and then in 2001, engaged a single architect, in theory, to do the entire project. It was the Renato Sarno group of Milan. Sarno did the schematic design, was then excused from the project, and the UN held, next, an additional competition. When they did, they set up, and this was part of the it was part of the request for proposal and also part of the resolution voted on by the General Assembly describing the purposes of the project, which were to bring the systems up to date, bring the building up to contemporary codes, both building codes and accessibility, to increase the sustainability or the unsustainability, reduce substantially the energy consumption of the building, and also to restore the historic rooms to their previous, as close as possible, previous appearance. Next. The group that was established to do this, one of the problems with having one architect responsible for everything was that they realized, the CMP, Capital Master Plan, realized that this was an enormous job. And so the project was split among a number of different organizations. This slide, and I won't read the names, goes to describing who's doing what or who did what, but it also serves as a reasonably good site plan for the project, with the General Assembly building just here, the tower, the Secretariat building, the conference building, almost hidden from First Avenue, but very visible from the river, and then the library and South Annex at the bottom. The big blue rectangle toward the top is the temporary building built to house meetings while the conference building and General Assembly building are under construction. Next. Now, one of the things that struck all of us when we started working on this project was the notion of continuity and change. I think most Americans, and most people who haven't paid any attention or much attention to the UN, or even those who have, never realized just how much the fabric of the building has changed. And so this, so go to the next, yeah, there you go. And there have been lots of changes. This photo's from 1980, That's around 2000, actually. And so what you have are the different additions. This was one for the dining room was added onto. It was way too small initially. And then the next change was the library building, which is not visible behind the Secretariat Tower. Next. The conference rooms were renovated in the conference building and also the General Assembly building in 1964. Then the 40-foot addition was added in 1978 to 80. That was a major, it was the last major renovation of conference spaces before the Capital Master Plan. So that was 30 years ago. Then you had, and the conference rooms were redone. The North Lawn building, which is home to the printing plant and some office space, was built after that. And then finally, the South Annex, a cafeteria extension. The reasons for the change are, in a way, perfectly exemplified by for the changes are perfectly exemplified by the General Assembly Hall. And if you look at the photo on the left, which is from the 50s, it shows a room designed for 75 nations max. And in fact, Harrison in 1947 said, oh, you know, it'll take generations to get to 75. So, with 193 nations, the first big change is that the seating all had to be arranged, and the seating in all the rooms began to kind of climb up the balconies. Another big changes had to do with the other big changes had to do with technology. So you have population, you have lots more meetings than you had originally, and then there's additional technology. There was always simultaneous interpretation, but if you look at the 1952 room, it had these wonderful giant suction cups or salad bowls as the backdrop for speakers. The problem is that when television became more important, which was pretty early on, speakers would sometimes appear with halos, or if they stood in the wrong place, ears, and that's why in the late 50s, the salad bowls were replaced with gold leaf, which actually also causes different kinds of problems. We were told by broadcast that some presidents like to have a very kind of rosy, warm glow on them while they're speaking, and other presidents prefer a cooler, harsher, more distant light. The host country gets to decide. The speakers get to decide what they have. In addition to that, there's additional technology. The UN went from not having any kind of electronic voting to electronic voting boards, which are sort of the colors of the batons. You can see them on either side of the gold there. And then, of course, with the increased use of AV, there are more and more AV presentations, so you have the two screens. This is a floor plan of the second floor, which is the delegates floor of the UN headquarters. And in a way, it's to help locate us relative to the Trusteeship Council Chamber. This is the GA, the General Assembly building, the GA Hall here, and then the Secretariat building, and finally the conference building along the river at the top of the drawing. And you can sort of get a sense of the organization of this building, which is very simple and really very lovely. 3 big rooms that are in fact 6 rooms stacked on top of each other, each one a double height space with offices at the south, and in this case on the second floor, the delegates lounge to the north. The 3 council chambers occupy this floor, the second floor, and up to the third, and they are the from left to right, ECOSOC, Trusteeship, and Security Council. And what these rooms mean, these rooms respond to what seem to me to be the purposes of the United Nations. You have ECOSOC, which is an organization in response to basic human needs of water, food, culture. Trusteeship truly represents the aspirations of all people to be free. And finally, of course, the Security Council is responsible for peace. And so there's this wonderful organization from left to right, in fact, of increasingly, I'm not sure if it's increasingly or decreasingly global concerns, that each of these rooms represents and collectively represents the mission of the United Nations. Now, finally, Trusteeship Council Chamber. This is Finn Juhl on the right here, and that's his sketch. He was given the commission in 1950, found out while he was on vacation in Italy. Positano is where this sketch was made, which is very close to the character and personality of the finished room. One of the things that Finn Juhl and Markelius both said was that these rooms are terribly proportioned. They're 23 feet high, 75 feet wide, and 150 feet deep. They're squat shoeboxes. How do you get them to feel as high as they can and obscure the fact that they actually have a ceiling at all? So what Finn Juhl suggested is this notion of parallel rows, which you'll see in the photos, parallel rows of grill work, almost like ladders on their sides, with boxes to supply air and light, electric light, suspended among them. You have the battens along the wall, the wood along the wall, and the windows for the interpreter's booths. And this is pretty much what the room is and looks like even today. Next. So this is a very, very quick history of the room. We're missing the best part. But we'll get back to it. Next, yeah. You know, you think PowerPoint is, and it's not. These are some of the original drawings and the one of the two types of original furniture that were in the room when we came upon it in 2004. This is Finn Juhl's final presentation sketch of the original plan layout, one of the elevations that his office did, and two of the watercolor drawings for the original chairs, although these are for the production models. These were marketed by Baker in the United States for a number of years in the 50s, and these are in fact the versions that Baker did, which were maple and walnut. The original chairs were walnut with little nickel saboton, as you can see over here in the Secretariat chair. 8 of those remained in the room in 2004. All of the delegate chairs disappeared, literally, in 1964, for reasons we'll see a little bit later. These are Stoller pictures from the room as it was first done. Remember this one, you'll see a colorized version later. So all of our kind of memory of what the original building was like, or based on black and white photos. And the thing about this room, more than any of the others, is it's so colorful and playful. And this is the only color photograph that any of us have been able to find of the room before its first renovation. And this is during the, we think, some people said it was Togo. It's not Togo. It's too late for Togo. It's 1963. It might be. I think it's Tanganyika, and their meetings with the UN on their independence. And you get to see some tantalizing hints of the carpet, the original carpet, and also the sort of generally the original color scheme of the room. Next. In 1964-65, they made the organization of the Trusteeship Council bigger, and that meant having to redo the layout of the room. The layout was redone by Harrison's office without the special connivance of Finn Juhl or the Danes, but Finn Juhl did provide a new chair because they needed more chairs, and did provide a new chair in 1964 called the diplomat chair, which remained in use in the room until 2009, when the room was closed for renovations. It's a, oops, go back.
Yeah.
No, that's okay, keep going. This is a, I'll do it later. This is the process of renovation, and this is actually one of my favorite pictures of the entire Capital Master Plan project because it shows the very careful way in which these people protected the existing fabric of the building while they were ripping it apart with jackhammers. Those are all the battens there. They put paper on the sconces and just
Wanged away.
there's a kind of rough and ready quality to renovations at the UN up until this point. Next. And this is the room in 1965 after that first renovation. Still has a horseshoe. The horseshoe's been flipped over. There's a podium, which is a high podium. Otherwise, the room is very similar. One thing, the delegate desks were always Harrison designs. They were not Finn Juhl's design. He did a design for the delegate desk that was not built because it was apparently too expensive in 1952. The advisor chairs, which are the fixed seats behind the delegates, are in fact also the standard UN Harrison design. Next. And then in 1977, 1980, when it was clear that there was going to be a limited life for the Trusteeship Council, as a good thing, the room was converted to what is called a full membership conference room, which meant that each of the each nation, excuse me, would have a seat at table, and each nation would have an advisor. So the only way to do that, they thought in 1977, Harrison's office thought in 1977, was to, in fact, do something that was a little bit more like theater seating. Next. And this is what the room looked like in, I think it's 93. And then, so it had a kind of, we thought it looked grand, but kind of boring quality. You can see the ceiling. There's that wonderful clock by Finn Juhl, which is being restored, and the sconces. Next. And this is a view of the room shortly before renovation began. So it had this kind of confrontational theater seating arrangement. One of the nice things about the original horseshoe was that it was possible to have a conversation across the horseshoe. So it wasn't just you talking to the podium and the podium talking back to you. It was being able to actually have conversations delegate to delegate, which is the way some of the organizations within the UN work. So that's where we came in. And part of our charge was the restoration and preservation of certain elements within the room. And this list was before the generous, extremely generous intervention of Denmark. And one of the first things that happened when we first met with representatives of the Danish government and Danish heritage was they told us that there was Finn Juhl's sample board was in a safe in Copenhagen. And we immediately said, oh, could we see that? And in fact, yes, we did, and we were able to examine it and compare things to it. Although it never left the UN premises, it remained in a safe in Assistant Secretary General Adlerstein's office, and you came and looked at it. So it was a little bit like working on a secret government project, but that was okay. And these are some of the elements, just as a kind of quick way of looking at it, that in fact were restored. The sconces, the ceiling ornament, the battens, and special elements like the clock. Next. But the first thing we did was the Danish gift was conditional. We'll give you money for restoration, provided you can return the room to a horseshoe layout. The Capital Master Plan said, oh, darn, no, there's no way we can get 200 seats in here. And I said, let me give it a try. And 30 tries later, we came up with a plan that got 200 people in, and 200 delegates, 200 advisors, 50 observers who are NGOs, the Vatican counts as an observer, among other things, and then also retained the same gallery seating that there was before. It's about 200 some odd in the gallery. We lowered the podium. This was a wonderful intervention on the part of the Secretary General. This is, again, it's a corporate client, but everybody kind of corporate in the sense of a group. But people made clients, individual client groups within it, all made very important and very good contributions. So the previous podium was very high. We pushed it down a foot, which makes it possible to make it accessible with a ramp, because there isn't enough real estate to get a 24-foot ramp in. And we're also restored not only the horseshoe arrangement, but we are restored the pit in the center of the room for the staff, for the secretariat table. And so what that does is it again allows people to actually have conversations across the room. One of the things that conference management was very happy about is the idea of being able to hold a smaller meeting in here. Sometimes groups have meetings or committees have meetings in large conference rooms, and there might be 20 people in the room, and they're all spread out because they're sitting where they usually sit. And this allows for the possibility of setting up smaller meetings in that smaller venue where people can actually speak to each other again. Next. The second thing that we did, and this was really kind of a no-brainer from the start, was to restore the original paint scheme. Building Conservation Associates here in New York did the research and the chemical analysis, and we prepared these drawings and all the paint chips, and it was a little bit of a sale because the rooms had progressively gotten lighter over the years. As a color fades, it's repainted, and it's repainted in whatever is on the wall right now, which is lighter than it was when it went on. So it went from this to this, a faded version, and but we have restored the original colors, and it's well, you'll see, it's fabulous. Next. Now, among the other things that we were always going to do was restore the battens. This was taken about a month ago. This was taken about 3 years ago. So everything was dried out. The room had not been restored, really, in terms of its architectural surround, hadn't been restored for 30 years or more. And so this is the original color of the room restored. So you have one of the ceiling rails on the left before restoration, and another one, this was the sample, restored on the right. And same thing with those ceiling boxes. The rails came down, there they are on the left coming down, and here they are about a month ago reinstalled. So you can see that there's this wonderful pattern, not random pattern, excuse me, of color of these metal panels that sit either as frames to the air conditioning and lighting, or just as almost like flags hanging from the ceiling. We always intended to recreate the carpet, and it had never occurred to the capital master plan people that would happen. John Buono from my office spent untold hours getting this to work. So we had that one little color photo. We used the length of people's feet to sort of confirm the idea of how far apart the stripes are. There were surprisingly few photographs of the floor. I don't know why. Certainly without people. And one of the things that's sort of funny about it is that for a building complex, that is so completely photographed, recorded. There's an organization that records everything. There wasn't a drawing of this carpet. There wasn't, there are a lot of things like that. And you say, well, why not? The gift's poorly documented. But we did have Finn Juhl's little scraps of wool, literally about 3 inches, and used those to create the colors. John also invested a certain amount of time in UIP's money in doing a colorized version of what the room might look like when it's done. And it's pretty close. It's going to look great. Next. We restored these big light fixtures. One of the things about those light fixtures, and if you were paying very careful attention, which I am sure you all were, in the black and white photographs, you would have noticed that there were 11 of these. And in the later color photos, there were 7. We thought for a period of a good 6 years that we would have to recreate 4 of these to install in the room. As it turns out, in 1964, they were taken down, and quite clearly says on the drawings, take down the fixtures, and we thought, okay, take them down and put them in your garage. They took them down, and they put them underneath the balcony of the Security Council Chamber in what was, up until March of 2009, an inaccessible void. They broke into the inaccessible void, found the 4 fixtures. They were restored along with the others, and we'll go back in the room. They're not there quite yet. Another element that is being part of the Danish gift is the drapery. The original curtain, which was woven by Paola in 1952, was replaced at least once with fabric supplied by Denmark. And this time it is being rewoven again, matching to Finn Juhl's original little tiny stripe there, and will be reinstalled. It's being fabricated in New York and will be reinstalled. Some of the furniture has to be restored, or is being restored. Some is new, some is being restored. The restored furniture includes all of the advisor chairs. Those were done in Memphis? Memphis. And the one piece of Finn Juhl furniture that was in the room when we got there, which is the conference officers table, that will be fully restored, and of course the clock next. But part of the gift was also a recreated piece of furniture, which is a recreation, a little bit of an adaptation, of the original Finn Juhl delegate's chair. It's being redone, remade by one collection in Denmark, which holds most of the Finn Juhl licenses. And it's a slight adaptation. The chair's a little bit smaller. The wing on the arm is a little bit tighter, and that's mostly because we had to get 200 people in the room. Next. And then this is a sense of what the room would look like based on the winning design from the competition in 2011.
Which the competition was an invited competition that started in October of 2010. There were originally 5 individuals who were invited to participate, except one of the individuals actually was a team, and that was Thomas and Casper, who wound up being the winners. That was an award that was given by the Queen at MoMA in June of 2011. And these are the competition entries. The competition was for a new secretariat chair, a new secretariat table, yes, and a delegate table. All right, there they are, the winners who
Couldn't be with us.
Could not be with us today. We're trying to
But they're here
channel them.
photographically.
They're here in spirit. And this is their process that they submitted. It does look like they're having a really good time doing this, isn't it? They are very thorough in their research, and they pull all kinds of information from all different kinds of sources. So this is their submission, and that is the chair. That's the winner. It is not yet in production. It's beyond the prototype point, but it has yet to be manufactured. We're looking forward to that. Do you want to take them through this one?
Yeah. So
this is their process.
This is a big slide from a little piece of their competition board describing their process and the influences on their design, which is at that point, I guess, the big question mark. Next. So first there was the shape of the room. Next. And its character-defining elements.
Yep.
And then the next three things were what's a table like, and what is and how are the different ways that you have a meeting, and how are the different ways that you might sit at your chair at that meeting. Then they talked about production and technology and the idea of using molded plywood. Or it's a new kind of plywood molded so that it could be formed with a double curvature.
The legacy of Danish design.
They're interested in sustainability, and their notion of sustainability is in part, and I think this is important in a way for the entire UN complex, their notion of sustainability is in fact that if you make something that's good enough, you won't throw it away. Next. And this, of course, fits in with with many of the initiatives of the UN. Next.
And then, what would Finn Juhl do with his Scotty?
Yeah. So they started the specific thoughts of the chair with the chieftain's chair and the other chairs of Finn Juhl. Next. And this sort of illustrates the issues with plywood. There's this sort of special German plywood, new on the market. They could speak at great length about it. I can't. But that's traditional plywood trying to mold it in two directions at once.
Into a single shape that responds to the way you sit.
Right. And so one of the things was they originally wanted to make a single shell, but in conversations with people who actually manufacture chairs, they realized that you would almost always break it at that point where something molded like that, where the seat meets the back. And so, in fact, separated it, but tried to get the feeling that the separation was magical, that the back was, in fact, floating. So they did a bunch of CAD drawings, and that's the little model.
And that's the machinery.
Yeah. And there's a view of the chair.
Is it beautiful?
So this is the table. They obviously made a little mock-up in the studio, and then when they got somebody to actually build one, they said, well, okay, can one person stand on it and not tip it over or break it in half? And the answer was you can get two people to stand on it, and as long as the delegates don't get more crowded than two people to a table on them, they should be fine. Next.
And now in the realm of a good idea is a good idea is a good idea, when the Queen saw the mock-up, and she suggested that wouldn't it be a good idea to put a groove, do you see the groove, at the edge of the table so that your paper wouldn't fly off? And they said, what a good idea, and there you are. That's the Queen's detail.
The first prototype was delivered in walnut. Everyone, and here it is in the room, as you can see, almost a year ago, and everyone said, this is a really nice table, but it's kind of dark. And so, kind of back to the thinking board, they didn't have to change a drawing at all. Next.
Yeah.
They went to oak, because the oak would have similar characteristics in terms of being able to bend to both of the curvatures, the curvature of the big curve, and then some of these tables are straight and some are curved. Next. And that's their sort of final set of drawings. And once again, the room, and a couple of images now just to end, of the battens are back, the ceiling is back the way it was. You can see on the upper portion of the balcony what the final color will be of those portions of the wall that are painted. And next one more is looking back a little bit toward the windows, really focusing on the wall with the interpreters' windows and the wonderful ceiling above.
And that, they were from September, yes?
Yeah, these are from end of September. There's been more work done back here. Sandy put a real crimp on the final concrete work, so this room is a little bit behind what its original schedule.
There you go.
And there we go.
All right.
Mr. Ambassador?
Yes. Would you like to join us? Oh, I get to be in the middle. I get to try and get up on this thing. Okay. I think one of our questions, given Paola Antonelli's statement about design being political, given the fact that the United Nations is probably one of the most highly politicized organizations, that was not its original intention, but given the fact that the United Nations is a highly politicized organization, can you give us the background of the Danish government's judgment to make such a generous gift?
I'll try to do that. Of course, the gift is basically all this marvelous piece of work you can do for $3 million, which is not. It's a fair amount, but it's not unreasonable. And we finance it, I have to say, both from private sources and from government contributions. But basically, I think the reason for us to enter into this consideration at all was that back in 1950, the UN had a Norwegian Secretary General, and he asked basically Denmark, Norway, and Sweden to donate each a room. Sweden donated the ECOSOC Chamber. Norway donated the Security Council Chamber, and we donated the Trusteeship Council Chamber. That was the reason that Finn Juhl was asked to do the design. So basically, we had a historic obligation. The Scandinavian countries, the role that the UN has in our foreign policy, and our big, strong commitment to the UN has definitely been part of that explanation. But also, of course, we fairly early on also thought that with Finn Juhl, actually that was a particular obligation. If you look at the Norwegian renovation and if you look at the Swedish renovation, they are not as thorough as our renovation. And that is because Sven Markelius was a nice architect, but he has not much of a name right now. Finn Juhl, on the other hand, has been rediscovered. He was young, he was not well known when he got the commission. Then he did a lot of design in the 50s and 60s, and gradually he came back, I think, on the international screen as a very good interior designer and a very good furniture designer. So the fact that this room was, I think, the only total design of Finn Juhl that remains in the world, because what he did in Denmark has been torn down and changed dramatically. So this was the only place in the entire world where you could see a total design by Finn Juhl in terms of a whole room. And then it was placed at the heart of world government, of world governance in the UN. It was too tempting not to engage, I think, in a thorough renovation of the room.
Well, we all want to thank you for your generosity and the generosity of the government.
Yeah, and of course it's not without hindsight, because we also think that basically this is a good platform for Danish design. It's a good platform for our endeavors in order to promote Danish design, Danish furniture at the US market. In this room you have 400,000 tourists every year. They do the big tour of the UN, and they are taught about the UN in different languages, and basically they all come through this room, they see it. It's true that the Trusteeship Council has ceased to function as such in 1994, but it's actually the most used room at the UN. When we last checked, I think we did some statistics in 2008. And at that point in time, from January through December 2008, this room had been used for 300 different meetings. There were meetings of the General Assembly, there were meetings of committees of the General Assembly, there were meetings of different groups and different committees and so on. There were meetings in the morning, there were meetings at the noon lunch break, there were meetings in the afternoon, there were even a number of concerts in the evening, because by chance the acoustics here are fairly good. And you could take out some of the tables in front, and you can actually put in a rock orchestra in this chamber, and it worked. I've seen that at several occasions. And you could have nice choirs singing and so on. And it's a beautiful and multifunctional room. The fact that it is not for only one council, like the Security Council room, means that it can be used in a number of occasions. And it is actually after the General Assembly Hall, I think first of all, the biggest and also the most multifunctional room meeting room within the UN. So we thought that given that, and we also had one more idea, which basically that the new Peacebuilding Commission that has been established in 2006 could also perhaps have their meeting in this room in order to stress what Anthony said was basically there's a flow of ideas from the economic development through security situations and the whole issue of human rights and peace building and so some of the main charter functions of the UN can easily, I think, be stressed through the architecture and through the use of the room, and we try to do that.
You had a question.
Well, one of the biggest challenges for architects and designers today is how to create an architecture that is in an age that is of diminished resources, and at the same time maintain delight, because this is a delightful room, and meaning. And so the question really is that, wait a minute, I wrote it down. The question really has to do with sustainability and preservation, and in a way, did issues of sustainability enter into Denmark's decision to contribute to the room?
Denmark being a leader in sustainability as a country.
We were very conscious of the fact that the whole idea of the Capital Master Plan is to reduce the carbon footprint of the UN. It's one of the, I think, the main features here is that we reduce actually the CO2 emissions and the use of energy by 50%, the use of water by almost the same 50%. So you need to be able to showcase the UN as a kind of new way to do buildings in New York, hopefully inspiring some of the refurbishing and renovations that's going on already, in order to show that this is the modern way of doing buildings. I think that it was part of our reasoning, but it wasn't the main part. I think the main part was the actual combination of new and old. I think that some of the Danish architects who worked on this and the designers were very fascinated of how could you actually take Danish design of the 1950s and take it up to this new century, and how could you combine the old fixtures and the new elements in a way that would be harmonic and show that the old and new could actually work together. And basically, I think also one small element. You showed the diplomat chair from 1964-65, and there are still around 100 of them at the UN. And if you go to visit the new building on the North Lawn, the temporary building, you can actually see now in the ECOSOC chamber, the temporary ECOSOC chamber. And I sat on one of these chairs 2 days ago on Thursday morning. They are still in use. And the good thing is that once we did the contract with the UN on this gift, we said that once we give to you 260 new Finn Juhl chairs, made in Japan, but designed by Finn Juhl almost, and produced by one collection. Once we give you them, we want the remaining 100 Finn Juhl chairs of almost 50 years old from the mid-60s. We want them back. So actually, when we deliver the new chairs in the spring, we will be the happy owners of more than 100 Finn Juhl chairs from 1960s. And we have this intriguing question what to do with them. And we will ponder that over the next few months. But we actually, they need some restoration, but they're still a fantastic, I think, design from the mid-60s. Not the best Finn Juhl have done, I think we can agree on that, but they're definitely worth having and holding on to. And the fact that they are still in use 50 years later, I think, is basically a comment on sustainability. And we do hope that the new chairs and new tables will have the same life length.
Well, it led to a lot of interesting discussions on how to treat many of the elements, because all of the advisor chairs are being restored. There are 700 advisor chairs. Those are the ones that are similar to what you're sitting in now. Those were those green chairs. But we had lengthy discussions on how that actually was going to be rendered, because, are you going to preserve 50-year-old latex foam? Not likely, and the detailing.
Are you going to replace the 60-year-old latex foam with new latex foam, or are you going to do what we did, which you should remember better than I?
We went. It was polyurethane.
Polyurethane.
Multiple
Cold form polyurethane.
And we had to modify while we loved some of the details, because over a period of years, the fixed seating had been reupholstered in kind of a variety of different ways.
Well, and part of that has to do with, and it's something that we don't normally talk about as designers unless the client asks, which has to do with whether or not your product, your architecture is sustainable in the sense it can be repaired if something goes wrong. And at the UN, they always have a tremendous pressure to have everything working perfectly. So all the chairs have to be perfect. All of the advisor chairs have to be perfect. You can't take an advisor chair away for a couple of weeks to restore it. You have to, in effect, take it away on a Friday and have it back there by Monday morning. And so what happened was that some of the original upholstery details from the advisor chairs in particular, the upholstery details of the advisor chairs over time became degraded by the speed with which they had to recycle the chairs when they wore out. There was also this wonderful die lot issue when you have 200 chairs the first day, they all look great, and then when you replace them one by one and the die lot of exactly the same vinyl, which is now pleather, when you replace it, the vinyl has different die lots, so that there was a kind of palette of greens and in trusteeship, and a kind of range of blues in Security Council.
And all has to be done in such a way that you can have somebody named Jose in the basement do it overnight. So,
yeah.
All right, we're going to throw it to the audience, please. Anybody have any questions about this process? Anybody have any questions?
Okay, now you have made a really sustainable building here, but have you also been looking into the technical installations? What about electricity, ventilation systems, and water in and out, and so on?
Yeah. Sorry. In the one slide that I one of the many slides I raced through or almost skipped, all of the building systems are new. Everything. All of the plumbing will be brand new, or is brand new. All of the mechanical system. There is the only ductwork being reused is the decorative ductwork in the ECOSOC chamber and in the public hallway, public lobby of the General Assembly building. Otherwise, everything is new. All of the 60-year-old air handling units have been discarded. There is a new BMS building maintenance system. Most of the campus was not sprinklered. 1952, you didn't use sprinklers. Everything is being was sprinklered. What that meant is that every single ceiling is a new ceiling. the other innovation that we did, and we did this only in the 3 chambers, was we introduced underfloor air distribution. So instead of the cold air pretty much all year coming down from the ceiling, which is obviously the way it did in 1952, it will come up from the floor, which should also result in additional energy savings.
But of course, then we had Sandy, and
Yeah.
a lot of the things that after 9/11, the UN did a review of security and moved a lot of things from the upper floors down to the basement. So that was thought to be very wise in terms of the terrorist threat, but nobody had thought at Sandy or at that point in time. So what we experienced during the hurricane was basically that some of the basements flooded up to the 3rd basement, and there are 5 basements, I think, in the UN building. And some of the electronics things had been placed in the 5th or the 4th basement, and of course was affected by the hurricane. So we need somehow to reconfigure the threat of terrorists with the threat of natural disasters, and do a little bit of that once more.
One last question here.
Yeah, there were a lot of changes that we saw happen for a lot of different reasons, and you spoke about being able to take out pieces and repair them in the basement. What kind of accommodations are being made for this ongoing need for change? And how is the space going to change over the next 10 years, for example?
Yeah. There are 193 nations in the United Nations. The charge to all of us from the organization was to accommodate 200 in the large conference rooms. We've added a number of mid-sized conference rooms to the project that will help ease a little bit some of the crowding. And then actually we're increasing the size of the General Assembly chamber in terms of accommodating delegations up to 206. But I think that it's pretty close to the limit of what will fit within those boxes. I think the organization's probably okay for another 10 years. I would be surprised if this is it forever. And I think that basically there will be continuing projects, and either delegates will have to get smaller and sit closer together at this point, or there'll have to be different kinds of accommodations made.
Yeah, just one remark. I think it's fair that we are not growing the number of member states very much in the future. Even if Palestine, which is now a non-member entity and maybe a non-member state in the future, even if that status is changed, it will not have any impact, because Palestine is already sitting among member states. We have a few countries that may become members, Kosovo and a few others, but I think we will not. 200 is a fairly high number if you look at 7 more member states. In the last 10 years, we have had 2 or 3 new member states: Montenegro, Sudan, South Sudan. So it's not growing exponentially as it did in the 60s and 70s. So I think it's in that sense it's a very wise move to limit it at 200. What we will see is probably some of the other kinds of technology. For instance, we have now also put television cameras that can show whoever speaks from the floor. That will actually allow for long-distance interpretation. So you can take a picture of those people speaking from their seats. You can relay that to Bangalore or to Shanghai, and you can do the Chinese English interpretation in Shanghai, and then you can get it back to New York so that people will listen in their earphones. And so you don't need perhaps the interpreters boxes as you now have in the renovation. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we will probably have new ways of technology that will allow us to do that even more speedily. And you can then reuse the interpreters boost for small scale meetings or whatever you will do. So there will be a constant development of the building within the framework. But it is a landmark, and you have to work within the confines of the original design.
And I think with these words by Ambassador Carsten Stauer, we will round up this session about the restoration of the Finn Juhl Chamber in the UN and the Danish donation. And please help me to give a very warm thank you to Anthony Cohen, Mary Burke, and Ambassador Stauer.